So I think we can start. And so good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the last lecture of our ARVA 2023 series of Southern Caucasus lectures. So today we will have two speakers on behalf of a large international group of research, which so I will introduce only the two people who will actually speak, but the group is made of Francesca Bertoldi from Foscari University of Venice, Hasmik Symonian from the National Academy of Science Armenia, and they are both here with us. And then we co-authors are Ruzan Mrchktyan from Yerevan State University, Ashot Piliposyan from the Armenian State Pedagogical University, and Pier Francesco Fabbri from the University of Università del Salento in Italy. So just a moment, some person is entering. So Francesca Bertoldi is a physical anthropologist, an archaeologist and physical anthropologist, collaborating with numerous archaeological expeditions, both in Italy and abroad, especially in the Near East, and since many years teaching physical anthropology at Foscari University. So during the last few years, she has been very actively promoting research collaborations in the Southern Caucasus, in particular in Georgia and in Armenia, about human osteological remains from old and recent excavations. Now, the results have been published, among others, in international peer-reviewed journals and international Congress proceedings and excavation reports. Today, she will present the results of a recent collaboration with Armenian colleagues, which are represented by Hasmik Symonian from the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography of the Republic of Armenia in Yerevan. And Hasmik Symonian is a scientific researcher at the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography, NAS-RA, fund keeper of the paleoanthropological materials at the service for the protection of the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture and Sports in the Republic of Armenia. Areas of interest are paleoanthropology and bioarchaeology. She is anthropologist at the Field Archaeological Expeditions in Metsamor, which is an Armenian-Polish joint mission, Artanish, Armenian-German joint mission, Kanageg, and many others. So the title of the lecture is The Archaeology of Violence in Late Bronze and Iron Age Armenia, and it deals with the topic conflict and violence, which recently witnessed a renewed popularity in archaeological literature, precisely due to the new wealth of information provided by the analysis of human remains by bioarchaeologists. And so I think Hasmik will start. So Hasmik, the floor is yours. You can start your presentation.
So dear organizers and dear colleagues, thank you very much for such an opportunity being here and sharing our results with you. So we have decided that we would like to make this presentation via two parts, presenting archaeological and paleoanthropological materials separately, but in meanwhile trying to present the whole site and materials in a complete view. So I will start with the part of archaeology now, What is more important that I wanted to start our presentation with the chronology of Bronze and Iron Ages in Armenia. Although we don't have the earlier materials such as Kura Araxes materials from necropolises we were examining in the Sevan region, but in any case I have decided that it's really important to share the information with you. So in the territory of Armenia, period of the Bronze Age is starting from 3400 BC, and this is a Kura Araxes culture with its different phases. But the most and interesting part with the anthropological materials we have, it is starting mostly with the Middle Bronze Age, and we had materials from Sevan Artsakh and Karmil-Bert cultures in the territory of Getashen. And of course, the most part of our materials are coming from late Bronze and early Iron Ages in the territory of Armenia. So those are dated back from 16th to 8th centuries BC, and lately, detailedly, I will try to go on with these materials. So what is about Nerkin Getashen? Why we have decided to examine these materials? Because this is one of the prominent paleoanthropological collection we have nowadays, which is being preserved or kept in the service for the protection under the Ministry of Science, Education, Culture and Sports in the Republic of Armenia. The results of archaeological research in Sevan Basin, which was ongoing about 100 years, provided us data and written sources, which is telling us that this region is a significant area which played historical and cultural which played a great role in historical and cultural processes in Bronze and Iron Ages of Armenia. So several generations of archaeologists have excavated here. So Nerkin Getashen, I marked it here with a red circle where it is situated and where is situated in the map of Armenia, the Nerkin Getashen necropolis. It is in the territory of Martuni district in Gegharkunik province. It is a coastal area in the southwestern corner of Lake Sevan. And on the right western section of Sevan-Gavar-Martuni highway. In the professional literature, the necropolis also called Demer, and the first excavations here started in the beginning of 20th century. So here I brought the short history of the excavations. So in 1905 to 1906, Yerevan has excavated here more than 20 burials. Later in his book, which has been published in 1930s, he expressed all the information here, but unfortunately materials and mostly anthropological materials didn't preserve to our days. Later, the area have been examined by Harutsun Mnatsakanian survey. In 1960s, Gedeon Mikhailian did some survey works here, and finally, the materials we are now examining have been excavated from 1989 to 1991 by Ashot Piliposyan, by Professor Ashot Piliposyan. So here some 40 graves and burials have been excavated, and all the materials which came out from these burials now are being preserved in the service for the protection and being examined by international group who is presenting this, who is making the presentation. Here, I would like to share the periodization of the burials from necropolis of Nerkin Getashen with anthropological materials. Unfortunately, not all the 40 burials which have been excavated in 1980s, late 1980s and beginning of 90s, didn't have anthropological materials. And sometimes, because of the lack of the materials, the dating didn't came out correctly. So now I'm presenting the materials. We have only one burial with Trialeti Vanadzor culture, which is dated back from 20 to 19th centuries BC, 4 burials from Sevan Artsakh and later also Karmil-Bert culture. But the most part, let's say, belongs to late Bronze and early Iron Ages. And another diagrams which I would like to show, those are Middle Bronze Age burials. Those are 21% of the burials in the necropolis which has been excavated. More than 50% is Late Bronze Age burials, and of course early Iron Age burials. It is also nearly some 20%. And another interesting thing concerning to Getashen necropolis, that this necropolis mostly have collective burials. So those are materials not only like a simultaneous act of making a funerary process, but also cumulative. So sometimes inside of one burial, we have layers of materials which have been put down, let's say, inside of the burial, and they are dated from late Bronze Age to early Iron Ages. Unfortunately, because this area have been excavated under the harsh situation in 1980s, the government of Armenia have decided that the southwestern corner of Sevan Lake should be done under some reconstruction, because they wanted to construct a pipe collector, which will keep the area of Sevan Lake much clearer, and it will make the lack of pollution of the waters. So they have decided that the whole area of the necropolis should undergo under the construction. And nowadays we don't have any part of the burial grave or necropolis preserved. So those are the old photos which we could present you now. And also with the materials, Nerkin Getashen necropolis is presented with various materials such as pottery objects, which are dated back, you can see, from 17th century BC till 9th century BC, and they are presenting rather different cultures. From burial 24, you can see red burnished pottery with black ink covers, and later materials are represented with Lajashan Medzamor culture, like pitchers, bowls, etc. They are gray burnished pottery, typical to this period of culture, of course. And another interesting thing that during the period of late Bronze and Iron Ages, we don't have any differentiation in the culture, because late Bronze Age and early Iron Ages in the territory of Armenia are presented with a huge cultural layer, which is called Lajashan in the territory of Armenia, of course, it's called Lajashan Medzamor culture. The differentiation is only in the metal objects, because starting from the 12th century BC, in most of the burials, we can notice a big amount of iron objects already. And another interesting thing, those are the metal objects which are directly connected with violence or presentation of violence, which later my colleague Francesca Bertoldi will present you. So those are the daggers, arrowheads, knives, and not only this kind of objects, but also wands, maces. Maces are not only made from metal objects, but also from stones, different bracelets made of bronze, and the buttons. But here I didn't manage to present all the materials which are presented in the Getashen burials. I just indicated only the metal objects which could be connected with the traumas get on the osteological and craniological remains, and trying to conclude and trying to make complete all the information concerning to Getashen burial ground. I can say that excavations which were carried out in the northern suburb of Nerkin Getashen village showed that necropolis occupied an area of several hundred hectares, and it was regularly used for making burials starting from 2000 BC. Latest burials are dated back to 8th century BC. And another interesting thing which is coming out from the examination of our colleagues from Geological Institute, it came out that within the 12th century BC, there was a destructive earthquake inside of Sevan Lake, and which later brought to abandonment of the area almost for 200 years, because all the small rivers, they stopped flowing in the area. So because of the lack, we are thinking that because of the lack of the water sources and small rivers, they abandoned the areas. But later in the 10th century, we again see the arising or resettling of the area connected with not only with burial funerary rites, which are again arising in the area, but also some settlements which are we can already notice starting from the 10th century BC. So this is the most important part of the archaeology concerning to Nerkin Getashen necropolis. And if we are not making any discussion in this part, I will just give the microphone to my colleague, Francesca.
Yes.
Thank you, Hasmik.
Yes. Can you close? Yes. Okay. Yes. It's
I
fine.
will just try to share my screen. Hope it works because I can see it.
Yes.
Oh, great. I'll just try to start the presentation because it doesn't really. I will go in this way because I go this way. I'm sorry, but with F5, no way. Just a second. I did. Here we are. I'm sorry, but Elena con F5 non funziona, quindi
no,
devo...
e se fai...
Aspetta.
Se schiacci presentazione...
Arrivo subito. No, non funziona purtroppo.
E se
Eccola qua. Sì,
eccola.
Yes, we are. I'm sorry, but I have quite a slow connection. Yes, as Hasmik told you, this is a preliminary presentation about the archaeology of violence in late Bronze Age, early Iron Age of Armenia. I have just one small correction about affiliations because Pier Francesco Fabbri now actually works for the Museum and Institute of Prehistory in Florence, but anything really changed. Our sample, we had the chance of examining 94 skulls belonging to 94 individuals found in this Bronze Age necropolis of Nerkin Getashen and Yerevan Getashen. 74 were adults, especially 44 adult males, 29 adult females, and 1 remains unsexed, while 20 were aged below than 20, were less than 20, they were considered immatures from an anthropological point of view. Our methodology, we performed on the sample sex determination on these adult skulls following 2 different methods, morphological analysis of the features of the skull and applying discriminant functions by Giles and Elliott, 1963, when we could record cranial measurements. For age estimation, we followed basically dental development and eruption charts in non-mature individuals following Al-Qatani and cranial suture closure and dental wear, patterns of dental wear, especially on molars, in adult ones. We assigned 3 main age categories for adults. That's young adult, for subject between 20 and 29 years, mid-adult, 30-49 years, old adult, 50 plus. On a few of them, we had this chance of collecting samples for a more precise age estimation through our applied Cameriere radiographic method on canines. So for a few of them, we have a more precise anthropological age. Our aim up to now, we usually inspected just from a macroscopic point of view and non-radiographic point of view, but we inspected these cranial remains looking for traces of traumas that have been grouped in 2 main classes. Perimortem traumas, showing macroscopically no traces of healing or bone tissue reaction, and antemortem traumas that show at least some traces of bone reaction. Of course, having in our hands cranial remains, we recorded also multiple stress indicators, cranial stress indicators, such as cribra cranii, cribra orbitalia, following the method indicated by Steckel et al., and traces of scurvy as well, observed as pitting of the surface of the sphenoid bone and the palate. And following the same method used for cribra scoring, that's basically 1, 2, and 3 method. 1 is absent, 2 and 3 is slight, and 3 is severe, but adapted also to scurvy. Regarding age and sex of the sample in general, we have a table here presenting age classes, of course, number of subject, percentage of subject, male, females, and percentage of males and females. We have to notice that adults are about 4/5 of the sample. Among adults, young adults and mid-adults are the majority at 70.3%. Old adults are just 20%, 19.7%. But we have to observe a marked difference in age composition between males and females, the latter being younger than the former. We have only 3.6% of females that fall into the old adult class, compared to 31.6% of males. Immature subjects with estimated age are 18. Infants, that's the age class considered between birth and 1 year old, are 27.8% of all the immatures and only 5.3% of the whole sample. Basically, we have few old females and few small children. Why? A possible cause is that the underrepresentation of infants could be possibly a result of funerary practices. Their skeletons could have been buried elsewhere, maybe in a specifically dedicated burial area or in domestic context, or we have to think about other biasing factors. I'm less prone to think of these, such as excavation strategies or preservation biases. We have to notice that in non-modern societies, the average percentage of infants on the total number of subjects is around 30-50% in a whole osteological sample that can be considered demographically representative of a true human population. The most represented age at death classes in non-adult series are usually birth perinatal, that's infant, and 2-3 years of age. That's also the age of the weaning process that often was delayed, associated with specific health risk. And we don't have infants in Nerkin Getashen. Adult males seems to reach older ages than female, but this is quite common as it has been observed in several sites. And lower life expectancy in females could be commonly linked to a higher risk during their fertile age, such as pregnancy, delivery, breastfeeding. About the occurrence of cranial traumas in our samples, we have another table here showing males, females, unsexed, or adults, males and females, and immatures, considering number of subject, number of trauma, individuals presenting trauma, antemortem, perimortem, and the percentages. We have to notice that we numbered, of course, number of traumas is different from number of subjects because many subjects had more than one. On the total number of 84 subjects with sufficiently preserved cranial bones, we recorded the presence of 23 occurrences of cranial traumas on 17 of them, 12 males, 3 females, and 2 immatures. In 5 cases, I numbered them, we had multiple cranial traumas, antemortem and perimortem. That, of course, was possibly the immediate cause of death. And in 6 cases, these cranial traumas were most probably the immediate cause of death. So there was no reaction, no bone reaction on the surface, and we strongly think that the subject didn't survive or survived for a very limited period. What kind of trauma we recorded? In 19 cases, we had blunt force injuries, and in 2 cases, other traumas that were were divided into bone cut and sharp force injury, dividing them, because one mechanism is for a cut and another one is for a true sharp force, maybe blow, maybe a point, maybe arrow, penetrating the bone. We are still waiting for X-rays and possibly CAT images. I want really to thank my Armenian colleagues. They already gave us a very good photographic documentation, thanks to Tikojan, Tigran, and they are really helping us in achieving these images. To complete, they will be fundamental to complete our study, but based on the macroscopic observation of the healing process, we could record 14 cases of antemortem trauma and 6 cases of fatal perimortem trauma with no healing traces, and possibly, of course, major injuries to the cranial vault, underlying cerebral structures, and eventually the subject died of exsanguination due to damage of major blood vessels. Another question, are these occurrences sex or age biased? They are definitely sex biased. Males show a percentage of 30% of cranial traumas, while females and immatures have more or less the same figures 11.5 and 11.8%. Where on the head? Where did we record these lesions? As you can see, basically on the parietal bones, frontal bones, and less frequently on frontoparietal, maxillary, zygomatic, and temporal. We have no cases of lesion to the occipital bones and the posterior part of the head, as we have normally in a subject fleeing from the assaultant. While we could say really nothing, because the percentages are really similar on the most frequently affected side of the skull. If there was a more frequently affected left or right, we really don't know and we can't say. Showing you some examples. Here we have cases of multiple traumas. Here a large one on the frontal, maxillary as well. Blunt force trauma here. Sharp cut injury. This was lethal. The subject didn't survive, of course. Penetrating wound. Blunt force trauma as well. Always blunt force here on the frontal. On the parietal, quite small weapon pointed possibly. Another one here, very well healed. Another here healed, completely healed. Many of these lesions are well healed and completely, the bone bridge between the two gaps was completely filled. Other cases, there were really many of them. When he had the skulls in our hands, we immediately noticed that this collection had a very, very high percentage of these occurrences. There's another one here, a small lesion here, bigger one here, completely and fully repaired. Very old one, also big and completely repaired here. Also here one, the frontal, and a cut, possibly. Fully healed. These were not healed, and they were major injuries. Most of the cases, in all of the cases, we absolutely think the subject almost immediately died, or anyway survived for a short time. This is a very huge one on the frontal. This part is totally missing with a radiating fracture that runs all along the frontal, and this part as well was in big with radiating fractures from the blow site. Also this one interfering with the suture here and possibly caused by a mace or an axe. This is a cut, a bone cut. For the mechanism of the blunt force trauma fractures, I use this reference. This is Craniotti et al. 2019. That explains very well what happens when you got hit by a weapon like this that causes a blunt force trauma. This can be a suggestion of a weapon that were found on the site, as Hasmik showed previously. That's a mace, a bronze mace, had possibly a wooden handle or something like that. This is a bone cut with a sword. This is very interesting because we could observe, we have to measure and to cast the lesion. And of course, X-ray and CAT will give us more precise details. We can observe here from the shape of this wound that the weapon that caused it had possibly a cannelure like this or this dagger. Something that left really an imprint in the bone. To conclude, we observed that 1/5 of the skulls definitely show traces of relevant cranial trauma. In adults, we have double the figures than in immatures, and 3 times in males than in females. That have a percentage similar to immatures, around 11.5, 11.8%. But why? We have an age-related hypothesis, or basically a gender role-related hypothesis. An age-related hypothesis in the sense that, of course, males got older than females, so maybe trauma accumulated, and of course we have more subject prone to that, or definitely a gender role related hypothesis, meaning that males were more often involved in more activities, war, assaults, interpersonal violence of any kind. We could observe also, we quote here Kudapertian 2014, that in other Armenian sites, the prevalence of trauma is similar. That's a published article on cranial and postcranial remains trauma. It's around 25%, 26.4% of the total subject. That's around our percentage for males. But in other sites, it is equally distributed among males and females. A big bias to our research is that we miss all data regarding postcranial skeletons, not only, of course, for recording violence, but to build up a more precise picture of bioanthropology of these skeletal series. So unfortunately, we are dealing just with a skull collection, but it would be very interesting to verify also on postcranial remains other kinds of traces of violence. We definitely suggest an extensive survey of all Armenian sites and samples dating to Bronze and Iron Age, and of course a comparison. And as soon as possible, we will perform X-rays and CAT analysis of our specimens. That will be very useful to understand the gravity of these lesions, their survival time, and other factors. Of course, we recorded having skulls, we recorded also multiple stress indicators as iron deficiency anemia and vitamin C deficiency, that's scurvy basically. Cribro Orbitalia has quite a low presence, 71.6% of the total number of subjects show no traces of cribra. 1.8%, just 1.8% is grade 3. That's severe, as you can see here from Steckel, is considered severe cribra. And it's more frequent in immatures. Cribra crani, that's porosity of the cranial vault, is 84.4% of the total that don't show any trace of it. So is almost absent. Scurvy, slightly more frequent, 29.8% are grade 2, that's moderate, slight moderate, and 4.6% are grade 3. 83.8% of immatures had traces of scurvy. Generally speaking, also from the preserved teeth we could see, because there are not many, we notice quite a good health status of the population of Nerkin Getashen. I add here some references if you are interested. And I wish to remember that part of this work is a result of the Erasmus Mobility Grant that was awarded from the Foscari University, Italy. And of course, thanks for the attention, and hope to see you soon with new data. If you have any question or any request, please.
Yeah. Just let me raise your hands if you have any question. And let me see. I see no raised hands. I'm checking the chat now.
I'm just
I don't
coming
see
out
any
of my video.
Okay. So in the meanwhile that you think about questions, I had a question for Hasmik. So you mentioned that the late bronze, early iron pottery, let's say, is absolutely identical. So you cannot see any development. Yes, could you elaborate a bit more, let's say, about this
actually, it is not
question?
Connected.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
I'm just telling that they are not different in a cultural way, but it doesn't mean that we don't have any developments, because of course the specialists of pottery, they can recognize and differentiate late Bronze Age material from the Iron Age, and those are the shapes, and also some handles are arising in the period of early Iron Age. We had covers of the pots, and let's say in the early Iron Age, somehow concerning to the pottery objects, we can say that they have been manufactured, because we have a really rise of the shapes, and we have much more higher quality during early Iron period rather than it was in late Bronze Age, but mostly connected with the ornamentation, or most of the shapes, they are continuously being continued. And because of that, in the territory of Armenia, concerning to late Bronze and Iron Ages, we are giving them one name of a culture, and we are calling it Getashen Medzamor. But it doesn't mean that the specialists can't recognize the periods of late Bronze and Iron Ages. During the Iron Age period, we just have much more types of the pottery materials.
Okay, and you cannot see any difference, let's say, in the patterns of cranial wounds within this period. So you cannot make a difference between earlier and later.
No, because so let's say all the weapons we have, those are really being continued in the period of early Iron as well. Maybe not in the shapes, but in the metal, they are getting different, because starting from Iron period, they are using much more iron in making metal objects, and in the territory of Armenia, because there are a lot of how it is called, mines of iron in the territory of Armenia, let's say, they are starting using a lot of iron, but it doesn't mean that in the shapes we can see much more of the differences. In the shapes of arrowheads or the daggers, they are the same for the period of late Bronze and Iron Ages. So connected with the periods of differentiate the wounds on the skulls or on the cranial materials, we don't have, we can't make any of this kind of observations.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. So we have a question in the chat by Judith Tomalski. So she thanks you and asks if you have evidence of a specific relation between the metal armors and healed persons with wounds. So person which we might
survived.
maybe,
Yes,
survived.
I understand.
Maybe can call warriors or no,
not really. Not to me, Hasmik. I don't think so. That
No,
we
I
can
don't think
establish.
as well.
No.
Okay, maybe later if we can do some kind of an examination of like a reconstruction of the wounds shapes themselves and try to compare them exactly with the metal objects we have, like some weapons. Maybe later we can do such kind of an examination, but not for the moment.
Yeah. So there is a raised hand by Maureen. So Maureen, you can ask your question. Yes.
Thank you. First, I just want to say this is wonderful. So exciting to see this work. And congratulations to you both. I had a quick question on terms of, and this might have just gone by too fastly, maybe I didn't hear the details, but I know you said there were some on the maxillary bones, and I was wondering where those might be located and if you saw any broken noses. And I'm particularly thinking of the argument from Hasanlu that they had a higher percentage of women with healed broken nose bones, and if you observed anything like that.
No. It was a trauma on the maxillary bone and fully healed. If I remember correctly, it was completely healed. No, nothing like this. And as I said, women are less prone to this kind of trauma. So to me, it's strictly role related. So it was on adult males. There was a juvenile that indeed the puncture wound made by a dagger was on a juvenile. So, and he accumulated 3 lesions on the skull. So it was a case of multiple, but in this case, I would say, of course, he couldn't defend himself possibly, but I wouldn't make a correlation with this kind of gender-biased pattern of trauma. Thank you, Maureen.
Yeah. So I have another question. I didn't quite well, maybe. Sorry. Bachtang, I finished my question and then so I didn't quite get if you could, let's say, attribute the different skulls to individual graves, and if you managed to see any difference between different graves in the, for instance, in the collective graves. So some which had less more people with traumas and others with more, and so, something like that.
So mostly we didn't work on that part. We just started working on the archaeological part some, let's say, weeks before. And now maybe we could think about the correlations, because we all have all the materials like exactly taken out from collective burials and single burials. Maybe for the later examinations, it's a really nice question, and we can do any kind of examinations on that way as well. But before, we didn't think on working exactly on single burials. Do we have much more, let's say, traces of violence on single burial materials and on collective? But now we can, of course, think about that question and do some examination on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. So Bachtang.
Bachtang.
Your lecture now, Francesco. Thank you very much. Hasmik, I'm from Tbilisi State University, let's say archaeology.
I'm sorry, I just can't hear you.
I can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Oh, no, can you hear? So thank you so much.
A bit better, yeah.
Bit better.
Very interesting lectures. Thank you, Hasmik, for a very, very correct identification of archaeological things and let's say all discoveries. And of course, special thanks to Francesca. What I would like to tell you, maybe if you need some additional precise dating, we already developed in our university Pier methods of dating of tools. So in case, especially when you are working on I'm now applying to Francesca, In case you need more precise, additional, I mean, the date for each person, it can be done because it works very well. So we can cooperate in this case. So you can write to me and I will manage for you, both Hasmik for you and Francesca, of course.
Would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just tools, and that's all.
Yep.
Based on radiation remains, as you know. Okay, so if you like, I'm ready for this. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you as well.
Yeah, it could be useful also to understand the period of usage of these collective burials, to understand for how long they have been in use, considering they were collective in the sense that there were many burials in them. And I noticed, for example, and I was discussing with Hasmik, if some subgroups of subject, in some subgroups of subject, these traces of violence were more frequent than in others. So there can be many really implication in this work that we have to complete. So.
Yeah, so there is another question by Judith Tomalski on the chat. Do we have a difference between death of men and death of women? So in the sense of which kind of violence was applied to men or to women?
Really. No. There were most of all were blunt force traumas, and we have the same pattern, really, in the sense that just men were more affected than women, and because they were men, possibly. So that's the only thing we really could notice. Of course, a man. Older in our series than women, and being old.
Yeah. Did you hear well this part, or was it just a problem of mine? I didn't hear part of Francesca's talk.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe could you repeat the last part of your answer?
I'm saying that the only pattern is that men were more affected than women because they were men, and
the voice is disappearing again.
There was Mi senti?
Yes, now it's okay.
In the sense that men were more involved than females, males were more involved than females. So in this sense, there was a sex biased pattern, but in the sense they were accumulating more traumas. Also, females had multiple traumas. Also, juveniles had multiple. There were too few cases to be relevant, really, of multiple traumas. Regarding traumas, they were all blunt force traumas, and in the majority, they were healed, so they survived to the episode.
So I see another question in the chat. So thanks for by OB. I don't know who it is.
I wrote something.
So thanks for the very informative lecture. Can you differentiate between blunt force trauma caused by blow and blunt force trauma caused by accident, such as a fall?
Well, if we look at the kind of deletions, well, of course, CAT and X-rays will be more helpful. But if we look at the aspect of the lesions, they are not caused by an accidental fall. They are caused by blows. I mean, with round-shaped, heavy objects on points axes in some cases. They appear as true blows to the bone. They are too extended and really too much for an accidental blow, for an accidental fall.
Yeah. So, any other hand or question in the chat? I don't see any, so I have another question. In fact, I mean, you mentioned other cases from Armenia which have a similar rate. What about other countries of the Southern Caucasus? I mean, has anything been done? What about, for instance, you were working on some things from Doglauri. You didn't see any of these, or
we still have to compare the Kurar access phase with late bronze phase and more carefully. There was a high percentage of cranial trauma in Doglaur as well, not with the incidents we have in Nerkin Getashen. There was a higher incidence in Kurar access times. This is for sure, but not with the same incidence we notice in Nerkin Getashen. That was immediate. I mean, we saw so many of them. And every time we took out the skull, there were lesions. So Hasmik remembers it very well. So, oh, another one. No, we don't have the same pattern in Doglaura. There's another point that Doglaura remains are very, very, very much fragmented, especially in the cranial parts. Cranial bones are almost non-existent. We couldn't record any measurement. Nerkin Getashen series is great also for measurements. And there is a marked difference between males and females, so sex determination is easier. We didn't have pelvic bones, for example, but our sex determination seemed to work pretty well because cranial remains were really very, very well preserved. That's a factor we don't have in Doglaura. In Doglaura, we have much partial and much biased indication and percentages because cranial remains don't work. So if we notice trauma, we're just on tiny little fragment of bones. So,
well, another difference which strikes me is that if I remember correctly, in Doglauri, the most of the late bronze graves were individual graves, and there was no collective grave for this period. Whereas here, the situation seems to be different. So this means that we really need to have samples from many other sites. Of this period before making general assumptions, because the situation seems different in these two sides of the same, more or less, period. Or what do you think?
Maybe I can answer to that question, because if we are speaking about the territory of Sevan region,
notice from Doglaura was there. Aspetta che ti ho perso. Sorry, Hasmik, go ahead. I just missed my link.
I will tell concerning to the territory of Armenia, and later you can add from Doglauri because I'm not in that. So concerning to Sevan Lake region, we have some burial sites such as Kanage, Hatsarat, Nerkin Getashen, which have like a collective, cumulative, or at the same moment have been done collective burials. But it doesn't mean that in the whole territory of Sevan region, we don't have like necropolises with single burials. Not far away from Getashen, there is another huge burial ground such as Lechashen, and most of the burials there are single burials.
Yep.
And concerning to my exact point of view, in the other shore of the lake, which I'm excavating last 3 years with Armenian, German, joint mission, there also we are excavating burials with single burial rate. So maybe in the case of Getashen, it's different. And but for the others, we can also continue our examination and our work go on with the materials of Getashen of the late Bronze Age and other burial grounds, and we can have another view. So.
Thank you. No, maybe there were different types of cemeteries. I mean, the ones with a majority of collective and the ones with a majority of individual graves. I don't know if Vahtang is still there, if he has other information from other Georgian cemeteries. I mean, of the late Bronze, early Iron Age. Do they have differences in collective versus individual graves, or what is the situation?
Situation is such, let's say, practically after late Bronze Age, let's say in the second millennium BC, on the territory of Eastern Georgia, we have no collective graves. The latest one belongs to 16th century BC, and that's all. But on the territory of Western Georgia, there are collective graves. And the period of existence of such type of burial tradition is from 9th century BC till 6th century, mid of 6th century BC, but on the territory of Western Georgia, on the collective graves, as well as the individual, of course. Can you understand me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, not very well.
Yeah, not very well, but
not very well, but it's okay. We got it.
You know that the big necropolis which was excavated between Toglauri and Tbilisi, Narekwavi, there are only individual graves, as you know. There are hundreds of graves they have excavated, but all of them are individual. What I have already excavated on Gratliani, more than 300 graves. All of them are individual graves, so there are no, after, let's say, the late stage of Bronze Age, does not exist collective graves in Eastern Georgia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this is the last chance for asking questions.
There's another one from Anna Maria, but I can't read it.
Where?
Anna Maria Belozic.
Here, yeah. So thank you. Can you say if there are any examples of human remains where indications of damage caused by disease have been found?
We would like to have them. I mean, we just have skulls, and on skulls we can just record trauma and multiple stress indicators, and we would really love to have postcranial remains. Of course, on postcranial remains you can have a full analysis of the whole subject. It's the same also in Italy, that up to a certain epoch, we didn't have anything else than collections of skulls. And we did the same up to late 90s. So, of course, keeping the whole skeleton gives you much more information. We had to deal what we had, basically, on what we had.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think if there are no other questions, I would like to thank
you, Anna Maria,
our invited guests, and well, I think this was a very interesting lecture, showing us how much it can be gained by studying this kind of remains, and how much. There is another question by Maureen.
Maureen?
Or
no, sorry, that was a clap.
No, she's clapping. Okay,
hands.
okay. So, well, I hope that this will stimulate new analysis and especially more careful collection of bone materials from these necropolises. So, well, I think this is the this was the last lecture of our series. So I would like to thank all the participants, and I hope you enjoyed them. And well, see you next year. Next year there will be another series of lectures of the Southern Caucasus group, the Harva associations. There will be other organizers, but I hope we will all meet together again. And so
thank you, Elena.
Thank you very much to everybody, and
Thank
bye-bye.
You,